Well, hello and welcome from Ventura, California to today's webinar, sponsored by DHL and hosted by WebAttract, the leader in thought leadership webinars. My name is Lori Dearman. I'm executive webinar producer at WebAttract, and in just a moment, I'll be introducing our panel of thought leaders because today's webinar is about hearing from these supply chain experts as they share insight into supply chain digitalization and some advice on turning the smart warehouse of the future into an efficient, profitable reality for your company. Now, today we've invited you along with over 1,700 professionals across 56 countries representing a variety of industries and job functions. Now, regardless of your industry, your job function, or your location, we're confident that you'll find today's webinar of value. Now, before we get started with our panel, we are going to have an interactive poll and would love to hear from each of you. Are you currently using any of the following digitalization technologies in your warehouse? And we'd love for you to select as many of these that apply to you: robotics, autonomous vehicles, 3D printing, augmented reality, drones. Go ahead and let us know what it is that you have been doing. Okay, I'm showing 53% saying robotics, 35% autonomous vehicles, 8% 3D printing, 24% augmented reality, and 21% drones. So kind of a nice split there, but 53% coming in with robotics as our front runner. I know that our panel members will have some thoughts about this as we bring them on, so go ahead and take us to our panel here, because I would like to introduce the first of our three speakers today. Joining us, we have Lisa Harrington, Senior Research Fellow at the Supply Chain Management Center, Robert H. Smith School of Business at the University of Maryland, and former faculty lecturer in supply chain management. She's also president of the L. Harrington Group, LLC, which is a firm that provides strategic research and consulting services across global supply chain strategy, operations, and best practice. Her articles have appeared in major business and supply chain publications around the world. And today, Lisa will be sharing with us some very interesting data around the new era in warehousing. So welcome, Lisa. It's a pleasure to have you with us today.
Well, thank you so much, Laurie. And it's a great pleasure to be here today, and especially want to thank this great turnout for this topic. Obviously, it's a very hot topic and one of great interest. So my point here is to start with giving you some background on the smart warehouse and using it as a guide for digital advantage. So what we're doing is entering a new era in warehousing. And as we all know, warehouses are familiar to us. They're big buildings with lots of machines and people inside doing lots of activities. And they've been run by computers, and that's been great. But what's different today is that we now have new technologies that are making smarter warehouses. So warehouses are evolving into what I call the warehousing 4.0, which is the more intelligent warehouse. And so what does that mean, and why is it happening? Let's answer the why question first. Number one, the whole world has seen a revolution in the nature of fulfillment and distribution. And by that, I mean, we have all become quite accustomed to the service parameters of an e-commerce style business model. So even if I'm making giant mining trucks, I now have to serve my customers as if I were, selling cosmetics in an e-commerce direct-to-customer model. So that's, the expectations are totally different, and they're totally higher. The second, fortunately, backs up and enables that higher e-commerce-like business model, and that is the tidal wave of technology that's happening in warehousing. And as I said, warehousing was sleepy for a long time, not so much anymore. So Warehousing 4.0 essentially follows what you've probably read about, which is Industry 4.0, which is we are now in the fourth industrial revolution, which started with steam and mechanical production and has now gone all the way into fully integrated digitalized technology. So Warehousing 4.0 is an underpinning for enabling Industry 4.0. So DHL Supply Chain, we wanted to find out exactly what the state of the art was in Warehousing 4.0. Like, where were companies? What were they doing? How far along were they in this? What was the reality? So we sent out a global survey, and as you can see here from the stats, we got 335 respondents from a great cross-section of industry verticals. We also got a full cross-section of geography. And what we found, there's two big takeaways. One is that these new technologies in supply chain, especially in the operations, the physical part of the supply chain, are completely disrupting the old linear model of supply chains. So linear model, by that I mean pushing stuff out the door under the SCORE model, which is the plan, source, make, deliver, and possibly return model. So that's very linear. What technologies are allowing us to do is create these networks, these digital supply networks that are essentially clusters of supply chain networks that come together enabled by digitalization, including in the warehouse, to serve customers under this new much higher performance bar that we all have to meet. So what happens when you get good at this? When you get good at this, the bottom line is that best-in-class companies realize phenomenal results. So if you look at the next bullet point, you see that McKinsey's study found that best-in-class technology users in the warehouse and transportation area can cut costs by 30 to 50%. So imagine what impact that has to your bottom line. I mean, that would make any CEO salivate. So, so going back to the DHL survey, we asked which technologies are most important to your supply chain, in your opinion, over the next 1 to 3 years. And so what we did was we evaluated for the two elements of very important and extremely important. And if you look at the red bar over on the left, you see robotics in the warehouse won by a handy margin. So robotics looks like the technology of choice where companies are definitely going to be investing in their warehouse over the next 3 years. Others followed, as you can see, and you can read, autonomous vehicles and whatnot. And I think in the stats that in the quick poll that we did, so DHL's poll was at 63%, and your responses were 10% behind that as far as robotics go. So you're tracking exactly along the same lines that the DHL research found. So that's very interesting to me as a researcher, by the way. So where are companies in adopting warehouse digitalization technology today? Well, they're just starting. So, and that's not a surprise because a lot of these technologies they have been very expensive and they haven't been very, very well tried and performed true. So if you look at the red bar, most companies are taking a very cautious approach. They're developing one or more initiatives, and they're testing it. For example, they're taking a part of a warehouse and applying, say, Google Glass or something like that in the warehouse, and then they're comparing it to their normal warehouse operations to see how does this work? Do people like it? What's the ROI? So essentially the takeaway from this slide is that we're really early on in this process. And interestingly, if you look up on the yellow bars, 10% of companies are not pursuing a digitalization strategy in their warehouse. And this is not necessarily because of cost or anything. In my opinion, this has to do more with size of company and the ability to spend money on this kind of technology. So the next question we asked are, what are your strategies for succeeding in digitalizing your warehouse if you're doing it? So again, going back to the last slide, if you look at the red bar down at the bottom, most companies are doing operationally specific projects. So they're in the testing phase. They're seeing how it works in the warehouse. They're seeing how it works in their transportation management systems, for example. But if you go one bar up and look at the category called collaborating with external partners, you see that's 55%. So look at the two of those bars, and that's really an important message because most companies don't want to own the entire investment themselves. They want partners who can bring investment and best practices to the table, and those partners would be the third-party logistics companies as well as the IT, underpinning technology, robotics types companies. So this is a partnership model for success. It's not a go it alone model. So finally, let's look at the benefits. And there's kind of no surprise. What do companies want to get out of Warehouse 4.0 digitalization? Well, obviously they want to reduce their costs and improve profitability. That's the red bar. 82% said that. But if you look at the next two bars up, the improved customer service and improved supply chain agility, you see that those are kind of neck and neck, and they're not really very far behind the cost and profitability issue. So I go back to my earlier premise that this is kind of a triumvirate. Yes, it's about reducing costs, but it is also finally about blending that with a good construct for becoming an e-commerce like customer service driven organization. So these three are to me tell a big story about the future of supply chains, the future of customer service, and the future of where warehouses have to be in support of all this. So Laurie, I'm going to turn it back to you and to introduce our next speaker.
All right, thank you so much, Lisa. And I know you're going to come back at the tail end to help us wrap things up and do the Q&A. So we'll see you in a few.
Okay.
All right. So next up, we do have Matthias Bolinder, Head of Logistics and Planning at Ericsson globally. And he has had several senior supply chain roles within the company. In his previous position, he was responsible for Ericsson's global distribution organization. Matthias has worked in several countries during the last 20 years and has been based in the USA, Malaysia, Ukraine, and in Sweden. He has a very broad base of experience in supply chain and logistics with the last 10 years on the executive level. Matthias will be sharing with us today how Ericsson is building a super agile warehouse network using a groundbreaking digital alternative to traditional WMS. So welcome, Matthias, and we really appreciate you joining us today.
Thank you, Laurie. A little bit about Ericsson. We provide products, solutions, and services mainly for the telecom operators, and it includes networks, digital services, managed services, and solution for emerging businesses. We are very much dependent on logistics. We ship a large number of boxes, and the whole logistics is very important in our delivery of products and solution to our customers. Ericsson's supply chain has changed slightly over the last couple of years. We have our production units and our external suppliers. They produce modules. We try to configure solutions close to the customers in our supply hubs. In the supply hubs, we make solutions, we kit them, we pack them, we label them, we put on software and we power them up and make packages that goes out either directly to customers or to our project warehouses. The supply chain more in detail when you're coming to the project warehouse that is typically close to the customer or close to where we deploy the projects. We have the central supply nodes coming in, we have antennas, we have site-specific materials. Sometimes we also have locally sourced material that doesn't make sense to provide to the central supply chain, like towers and heavy products, because they're too costly to basically transport all over the world. And then like in every operations, you have some returns, sometimes because of excess. We might have faulty material, and you might have sites that is not happening, so you have site refusals coming back that needs to be taken care of in the project warehouses. Our supply chain challenge is really in the project warehouses and the project warehouse control. We have a high number of project warehouses that is close to the customers. Right now we have more than 500. And the lifespan of a project warehouse is typically quite short. It's for the deployment of the solution that we have sold to the customers. It can be as short as 3 months, but it can also be a couple of years. But typically we try to open them, have them open during the operation or the project, and then we close them. And in these warehouses, we have a large number of high value configured products. We have site materials, and it's stored until final mile delivery and installation. And typically what we see is that standard warehouse management system, they work very fine, but they are costly and time consuming to deploy. You can also use third-party suppliers that is running this for us, but then we either need to set up EDI messages to get full control of inventory levels and all the different statuses that we need in order to have control. So we have been thinking, how can we solve this dilemma and how can we get better control in all these warehouses where we can't really afford to have the expensive warehouse management system. So what we found when looking around was a precise localization system, which is a cloud-based, very precise, high-density localization solution. And I can tell you that visiting one of our warehouses where we have deployed it, I put one of our tags on top of my head, and you could, on the iPad, you could see exactly my length. So it's very, very precise system. And this system that we are deploying now in small scale and testing some use cases, it's a real-time localization system. It's a system that finds, tracks, manages, and identifies the exact geolocation of the target where you have put the tag. And we see that we can enhance operational efficiency, we can increase profit margins, and we can increase customer satisfaction by having control of our inventory. In principle, very easy. It's basically looks like this. We put a number of anchors in the warehouse. We put tags on the materials and boxes that we want to track, or the asset or trucks or whatever we want to trace. And then we have a real-time localization calculation engine in the back that is doing all the transactions, so we have exact location of each of the box in a warehouse. The tags and anchors that we have here is a couple of examples. The left one is a wearable version that you can put on people. It has long battery life. It's almost real-time monitoring, and you can also put sensors on them for motion, temperature, light, and so on. Then we have an example of anchors in the middle, and there you have put a number of anchors together so you can easily deploy this in a warehouse. And if there's a big warehouse, you make it longer. And then an example of a single anchor that we have mounted on a wall. And when you come to a typical warehouse, this is one of our warehouses. This is how it traditionally looks like. But suddenly when you put this precise localization system in a warehouse, you basically get very good control of every box, and you can feed that back into our back-end system. And suddenly you can start to deploy new solutions, new ways of thinking, and you can really start to operate your warehouses in a different way. And this is important in developing countries and where you typically don't have put up this kind of warehouses. You can think radically different when you set them up, and almost like a pop-up warehouse, which is a very kind of agile solution that you can get control with very low cost. So we are right now testing a couple of use cases where we see how we avoid to have any lost handling units. We are always up to date where all materials are. We know the inventory. We know exactly where every box is. We are looking at how we can optimize processes, how we can optimize the way we work in warehouses. Then we're also looking at some other use cases with external customers where we look at security solutions if you have very expensive goods, or safety solutions where you have heavy machines close to people, and to see if we can avoid any accidents by having notifications if people and heavy machines are too close to each other. So what we have seen is that in the future, we don't really need any shelves or bins as logistics components. We see completely new storage principles. We see that we can have fully dynamic warehouses, and we see that we can get an end-to-end supply visibility, which is really important because the project warehouse is the last point before we ship the goods to the customer, and therefore we want full control, and we want to have really high service level and responsiveness to the customers. And we believe that by implementing this, we can really increase this in some of the warehouses where we don't think we have been up to the standard really. We are currently running this in 2 product warehouses where we develop processes, we develop the user interfaces, and we are testing the concept. And the business case so far looks very promising. Thank you, and back to you, Laurie.
All right, thank you so much, Matthias, and we'll also be having you back on for the Q&A coming up, so we'll see you then. All right, our next speaker, we have Adrian Kumar, and Adrian joined DHL and is responsible for DHL's logistic design capability servicing all segments, including automotive, consumer, energy, life sciences, retail, and technology. He manages a team of more than 50 associates working upwards of 500 projects a year requiring solutions across various technical disciplines, including warehouse design ranging from conventional to automated, transportation optimization, network design, inventory planning, and facilitation. Adrian has a master's in industrial engineering from the University of Toronto. And Adrian, welcome to the webinar today. So great to have you on.
Okay, thanks, Laurie. So today I'm going to talk about some of the things that we're doing at DHL, and in particular, robotics, which is very timely given the vast majority of respondents in both Lisa's research and the quick poll identified robotics as one of the main areas of opportunity within a new digital warehouse. So our company, we've long invested heavily in research and development to understand new and emerging trends. Perhaps you've downloaded one of our white papers on topics such as augmented reality, blockchain, many others. But now we're finding that the pace of advancements is happening quicker than ever before. And thus we formed cross-divisional trend communities around several key digitalization topics. And these trend communities really create an environment of deeper engagement in the company and encourage folks to conduct pilots and test new technologies. And today I'll talk about some of the work we're doing in the robotics and AGV trend community, the trend communities that I'm responsible for. First, let's talk about what's driving some of this. And really, a lot of this comes down to the e-fulfillment profile. A traditional warehouse operation, in some cases, it could be 500,000 square feet with 50 or so associates in it, and those associates might be working on forklifts, moving products in bulk pallet moves, etc. An e-fulfillment warehouse might just be 50,000 square feet, but have 500 employees in it, and those employees would be moving smaller orders and typically moving them in pick carts. Typical e-fulfillment order is usually just a handful of items. And no matter how good the slotting is, those items could be spread out across the warehouse. Sometimes those items are in specific categories, as you see here, but inevitably those items on a particular order will spread out across the warehouse floor. And this is one of the most challenging things in material handling, how to efficiently and in a very timely manner pick orders like this, which have very low density. Now, there are a number of solutions on the market, and currently the vast majority of unit pick operations are doing manual cart picking. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't mechanized and automated options, and some of the traditional options, they would mechanize, they would have goods to person or sortation type mechanization strategies. And certainly at DHL, we have our fair share of operations with these types of technologies in them. But these technologies require commitment. You need to be sure of your profile. And many companies, they're not sure. They might just be growing. They might just be starting out on their e-fulfillment. They don't know where their e-fulfillment penetration is going to mature to, what their items are going to look like in the future, how many items they're going to have, how big they're going to be, how much they're going to weigh. So they're not ready to kind of put bolts to the ground. So hence, manual solutions are still the dominant form of picking in a lot of these unit pick operations. So really you need a technology that's going to be a lot more flexible, scalable, agile if you're not sure where your profile is going to go. And that's why we like collaborative piece picking robots so much. And just to define the space, we're talking about robots that can work alongside people within existing infrastructure. And although this is a new and emerging field, many startups have already sprouted up, and they all have different strategies. Some simply replace the cart in an operation. They just go from a manual pick cart to a robot which follows a picker, and others integrate more into the WMS and do their own optimization and totally reinvent different types of pick strategies. Let's take a look at a quick video here. In this video, and I hope you can see it, we're starting with a traditional manual pick process. Here, an operator picks products out of the rack and puts it on the appropriate order in their pick cart. Next evolution is simply to have a robot follow behind the picker. The picker now has their hands free and doesn't have to walk back and forth to the packing station. So you start to get a productivity increase. Now the robot leads the picker. This is the next evolution. The picker gets the pick instructions from the robot, and again you get a productivity bump with this type of strategy. Here in the swarming approach, there's no direct relationship between a picker and a robot. They're both essentially free agents. So the picker can have more of a zone-based pick strategy. They don't have to move across the entire warehouse. The robot does the traveling and the pickers stay more in zones. And there are different types of strategies on the market. There are companies that move the totes between different pick zones, as you can see here, more like a traditional conveyor pick and pass, but using robots to do that can work alongside people. And then finally, the next evolution here is robots that will retrieve inventory from the racking and bring it to a put wall where there'll be a stationary operator there who will basically take the products from the robots and put them and consolidate the orders. And that will virtually eliminate all travel. So you can see a number of different strategies there. So what does it all mean? Well, each solution has its own unique combination of warehouse management systems integration costs. The follow me robot, which is just the first evolution from the manual pick strategy, virtually has no WMS integration cost. The robot just follows the picker around all the way to the goods to person retrieval process, where there's heavy WMS integration costs because that system is now controlling the picks and the whole logic associated with it. In terms of labor costs, the manual solution and the follow me solution would have a lot more labor costs versus some of the other later technologies that you saw, the swarming approach, the goods to person approach, where you're seeing a lot higher productivity increases. And the capital costs vary as well. Capital costs here are driven primarily by the number of robots per person that you need. So in the follow me approach, you basically have a 1-to-1 ratio of robots to pick operators, versus in a goods to person retrieval process, you have about a 10-to-1 ratio, 10 robots for every one person. So significantly different capital costs as well. So really, in conclusion, careful assessment is required. Even with something like robotic picking, there are many different options and the answer is not clear-cut. You need to understand your goals. Do you have a severe labor shortage and maybe you're willing to invest a lot more capital to reduce the number of labor required for that operation? Are you looking to get at service levels? We didn't really talk about it, but some of the technologies there, they can expedite orders through the system a lot quicker than some of the other options, and therefore they might be better if service level is your primary objective. You need to crunch the numbers, and DHL can certainly help with this. So with that, I'd like to pass it back to Lisa to help wrap things up.
Thank you. That was excellent from both. So I think, Laurie, you wanted to pose us another poll?
Yes, let's go ahead and do that. And folks, coming up on your screen is that second poll. We'd like to hear from each of you in terms of how helpful will warehouse digitalization be in creating a more e-commerce-like service capability? Somewhat helpful, moderately helpful, extremely helpful. We're not sure. So it looks like 2% saying somewhat, 20 moderately. Majority here, 72% saying extremely helpful, 6% with the not sure. So Lisa, any thoughts about these responses?
Yeah, so actually it's quite interesting to see that the group that we have here today on the webinar mirrors very closely the group that we surveyed through the DHL Global Survey. So essentially the message, the takeaway is warehouse digitalization is here, and it's like, how do we want to best optimize it and exploit it? So and Adrian and everybody has brought up wonderful comments today. So I'm just going to summarize and then quickly open it up so everyone in the audience can start asking questions. So the key takeaways are basically, even if you're not an e-commerce company, you still have to act like one, and more every day. So there is no choice. But thankfully, technology can enable you more and more to do that. So here you see the list of what customers expect, and we've talked about this. But it's a combination of, like, the dilemma is, how do you meet those expectations, which are higher and higher, but at a cost structure that is affordable? And I think because the cost of digitalization technology keeps going down, and it keeps doing more and more tasks in the warehouse and elsewhere in the supply chain, that the smart companies are literally cobbling together the new technologies with the traditional warehouses, and obviously there are integration issues with people placed in the right jobs and process excellence. And all of that done well delivers on the kind of ROI that I referred to earlier on, which is the 30 to 50% improvement in ROI that McKinsey said. So I think the takeaway is digitalization, and I have struggled to pronounce that over and over again, but it is here, and it is here to help. And if you do the ROI on it over time, it is not, it is very cost effective. And the whole issue of where do people fit into this, people have a perfect place to play in this. So I'll close out and open it up to questions. So I'll turn it over to you, Laura, and you can sort of run the Q&A part, if that's okay.
Absolutely. And folks, before we do take some of the questions that are queuing up, I wanted to just cover some next steps. I would like to invite all of you to keep an eye out for a follow-up email, which will be distributed in the coming days. And in that email, you'll find a registration link for the April 18th webinar, Consumer Digitalization and the Evolution of Omnichannel Fulfillment, where you can learn how to turn complexity into profit with next-gen supply chain analytics. So keep an eye out for that. As well, access to additional digitalization resources related to implementing physical warehouse technologies. And lastly, information on how to set up a one-on-one discussion with a supply chain digitalization expert. So keep an eye out for that, that email. At this point, I would like to invite all three of our panel members back to the virtual podium, if you will. And I'm going to go ahead and start asking some of these questions. So first one, I'm going to send over to Matthias, and that is, are solutions like yours applicable to other industries, for example, pharma, heavy industry, spare parts? And if so, how would you envision them working, and in what situations? I'm happy to repeat any of that if you need.
No, thank you, Laurie. I think I can give two examples. I think one example with heavy industries, if you go to the mining industry, for example, you have very heavy machines going down in the mines, and at the same time you have people working down there. And you don't really want heavy machines and people be at the same place at the same time. I think this technology is very useful there. Sometimes you have narrow passages where basically heavy machines, they cannot meet because you don't have the space in the mine. And then by knowing where the other vehicles are, they can plan their routes, they can plan their operation so they get more efficiency out of it. And then of course, when it's time to make a blast, you don't want to have people close to that place. And then if you have tags on people, if you have tags on all the vehicles, you can increase security in the mine. I think another example is if you produce products that looks very much the same, but they are very differently configured. I think I showed this example with the scooters, but if you take cars or other vehicles, they might look very different. The car might be white, but the specification is really built after a specific customer that have configured the car. And once it has been produced, you drive it out in a big parking lot. And if you have these tags, you can basically park it in any free parking lot. And through your information system, you know exactly where the car that should be delivered to a specific customer is parked. So you don't have to really look for that car. You don't need any stickers or marking on them. You can see on your tool that this is where I should go and pick up the car, and you get a verification that it's the right car when you get close to that specific vehicle. So that is two examples where we see that it's good use cases.
Fantastic, thank you. All right, Lisa, a question here for you. Are there any research studies that show the actual ROI over time, payback on an investment in warehouse robotics, real numbers?
Yes, yeah, and so that's always the question, right? And I had a couple of similar questions. So I did a little research on that, and there is a study called Calculating Your ROI for Robotic Automation, Cost versus Cash Flow. And it was a study done by the Robotics Industries Association, and it looked at the impact of labor savings over robotics investment life. And this is just talking about robotics. But so it took a typical installation of $250,000, which isn't a big robotics implementation. Most companies, most CEOs want a 2-year payback, and they say, well, you know, it's not going to make that 2-year threshold. But this study, and we can certainly provide the URL for it because it is a cost calculator. So it is dynamic. This study found that starting year 3 to year 10, if you look at the positive cash flow, it rises. So you essentially make your payback in, let's say, year 3, but then your positive cash flow rises to, in this study on a $250,000 investment, $1.5 million in positive cash flow savings over the long term. So the whole idea on this is thinking long term. Robotics is not a quick like, it's not, you know, a 1 or 2 year thing to look at. It is a long-term investment, and it goes to sort of melding. What's the best strategy for melding this ROI payback, which is significant, and all the human elements of that? And that's another issue that comes up. But I'll leave you with that study, and we can provide that URL for that cost calculator, because I found it very valuable.
All right, I've got one here for you, Adrian. How widespread is adoption of these kinds of robotics, and where do you see that number being in 5 years?
Yeah, right now this technology is in its infancy, and you know, there wouldn't be more than maybe a couple hundred warehouses across the whole U.S. with one of the forms of collaborative piece picking robotics that I showed at most. I think this industry is growing. It's growing at exponential rates right now. So I would expect that to increase drastically. In terms of where I see that being in 5 years, I would see some significant penetration, particularly with collaborative piece picking robots, where you have robots working alongside people, and really getting some of those productivity increases that we think are possible. I see this as maybe in as much as 25% plus of e-fulfillment warehouse operations in the next 5 years.
All right. Thank you. Back over to you, Lisa. The technology usually replaces labor force, and in some countries, like Brazil, the technology investment is hard to pay back as the labor is cheaper than the cost of the technology. How do you balance it, and how do you make it more attractive?
Right. So I think that's an excellent question. In some markets, for sure, labor is going to remain cheaper than investing in this kind of technology. I think the crux of the matter is, at what point where is your point of diminishing returns for, with regard to your customer service requirements and what your labor pool access is? Because even in developing countries, labor continues to be an issue, and so this is not really an issue of man again versus machine. It's sort of like if you do a careful calculation of how to augment your labor force smartly with the right investments in machines or robotics, whatever they happen to be, then what's that worth to your boost in customer service, against your competitor? What's that worth? So do the ROI calculation on, if I serve my customer, let's say 20% faster or better or more accurately than my closest competitor, and I do that with a combination of man plus machine, then I think the ROI would make sense. So yeah, it's always an ROI calculation, but I think eventually it's about what's the best blend of man plus machine.
All right. Thank you. Going over to you, Adrienne, a question here. My colleague and I are in a unique position as an on-site IT for a large warehouse in chem energy. We'd like to look at R&D or in-place technology solutions for our warehouse, but are constantly told we can't pursue such technologies. What should we look for, and where should we look?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I see a few questions along that theme where people are talking about high weight, high density products. Some of these technologies that I mentioned today are not applicable in that space. Some of the things that we're doing in our larger bulk pallet move operations, we're deploying VGV, vision guided vehicles, AGV, automatic guided vehicle technologies. That technology, there's a lot of companies on the market that are offering that technology for pallet moves, moving pallets from one side of the operation to the other. That seems to be working fairly well. The next evolution is obviously automating forklift equipment that can automatically put away product into racking. As you kind of get into just how tightly controlled that needs to be, you're kind of entering into, well, is that more or less an ASRS, an automatic storage retrieval system, or is that just an automated forklift working in a conventional warehouse? So there's companies that are working on those technologies. So I think as you see more automated traditional forklift equipment, those technologies will be more applicable in kind of the bulk traditional warehouse settings. But I will say this, that those types of bulk warehouses, they're a lot less automated, and some of the leading players in the marketplace, they're running those operations quite manually. But I would look at some of the automated forklift equipment that is really coming onto the market right now, because I think those are relevant options.
Okay, thank you. Back over to you, Matthias. How is stock booked to or from the WMS?
Yeah, okay. What we do in this solution is that when we have stock coming into our warehouse, we do traditional goods receipt, and upon goods receipt, we basically marry the product with one of our tags, and then once it's married, you can put it away, and then you have an automatic upload to our backend system, and we have visualization on where it is. And once it's time for goods issue, you go and find it, you take it to the dispatch area, and when you do goods issue, you unmarry the tag from the box and off it goes with a truck. Or so that's a very simple explanation how it's set up.
Okay, I'm going to go over to you, Lisa. Very clear for me that digitalization is extremely helpful for e-commerce like logistics. Is there a real benefit with positive ROI for digitalization in traditional logistics, consumer industry to retail?
Well, I think you have to look at the nature of change in sort of the big box, kind of the pallet load type of warehouses, which we've all the folks like Procter and Gamble shipping pallet loads of stuff to Walmart. So probably the kind of technologies we're talking about, robotics, is not, there are other technologies that are better placed for that, and those may be more sensor based, more Internet of Things type based technologies as opposed to robotics. So it depends on the kind of the profile of your business. But my point earlier in the conversation was that even a pallet based, full pallet load, full truckload based mass distribution operation still now has to operate under an e-commerce constraints. So that was not the case in the 10 years ago. So whether it's not going to be follow-on robots, but it's going to be more things like Internet of Things and more things like what Matthias was talking about, where machines are tracking each other and interacting with humans, and so localization. So I don't think the sort of the pallet-based model is going to go away completely, but I think it can be improved by other sensor type technologies, the kinds that Matthias is talking about, and the agility enablers, so that it doesn't take 3 days to process a full pallet load or a full truckload order to a mass merchant. So I would say, yes, it's a combination of different technologies, and you have to look at all of them.
All right, thanks. Next up, we have a question for Adrian, and it's DHL is using robotic solutions at picking operations. Which picking strategy is used?
Yeah, so that's a good question. We've tried quite a few of these different strategies that I talked about today. We started with the Follow Me robot. That was the first strategy that we saw. And we are also trying the Lead Me robot in one of our consumer goods operations. They have an e-fulfillment operation. It's an omni-channel warehouse under the same roof as their bulk their bulk warehousing. So we're trying the Follow Me robot in there. And we've also done a bit of work with Locust Robotics and the swarming robot approach as well. Besides that technology that I didn't talk about, last year we had a robotics challenge, and we were looking for a robotic piece picking robot, a robot that can actually reach into a slot and do the piece picking itself. So we had a number of competitors, and the winner was a company, Boston-based company called Vecna. You know, we've been dabbling in that as well, although we don't have any operational solutions.
All right, well, thank you so much. And folks, we are at the top of the hour, and before we do sign off, I wanted to take a moment to thank each of you for joining us and trust that you found today to be of value. As well, a special thanks to our panel members, Lisa Harrington, Matthias Bolinder, and Adrian Kumar, for joining us and sharing such great information, and as well to our sponsor, DHL. Again, thanks for joining. This is Lori Dearman saying, hope we see you on the next one. Have a great rest of your week. Bye for now.